Thomas Warrick is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He joins me live from Washington. Great to have you here with us on TRT World. So traditionally, the United States is allied with Ukraine, and in any sort of peace deals, I think the general expectation is that the United States would pressurize Russia to meet demands of the Ukrainians. But what we are seeing happen here is the exact opposite. It's the United States pressuring Ukraine to agree to Russian demands. Why is that?
Well, good morning to you and to your viewers. There are a lot of people who would like to know the answer to that question, but really the only person who knows is Donald Trump himself. It is true that he seems very motivated to try to end a war that he considers wasteful and that he considers is not doing anything productive for anyone. But the way in which he has pitched this exchange of territories has many people baffled. It could be that what he's talking about is the idea of taking a very irregular front line and freezing it in place, but making minor land swaps. This kind of thing happened in the Korean armistice. It's been talked about as a way of settling a boundary between Palestine and Israel. And in theory, at least, it's possible, but it usually only happens when both sides really want a deal. And there's actually no real sign that Vladimir Putin wants a peace deal on any terms anywhere close to what Ukraine could accept.
Now, Thomas, understandably, many people, many experts have this concern that if there is a peace deal in which Ukraine is forced to make big compromises on its territory, then Russia might stop for now, but it might do it again down the line.
Yes, and I'm one of those experts. The other more important point, though, is that there are actual limits to what Ukraine would accept. It's a classic rule of international relations that wars start when both sides decide they could get more from fighting than from giving in to the other side, and vice versa. Wars end when both sides decide that war is not serving their interests and they'd rather have peace. The problem with what Putin has been saying for the past 6 months is that there is no possibility of Ukraine agreeing to the near total disarmament that Putin wants, or to give up the opportunity to integrate with Western security alliances such as NATO, and without any assurance that Russia wouldn't just start the war again in a few years, it's hard to see Ukraine going along with a ceasefire along Putin's lines. And so what will Donald Trump do? Donald Trump most famously has less knowledge of history than any president in living memory, and cares about history even less than that. But many with a long memory or who've studied history remember when Neville Chamberlain went to Adolf Hitler in Munich in 1938 and gave up Czech territory. He thought it was going to be for peace in our time, and war broke out a year later, and it was a world war. And so the possibility of Putin not being satisfied with what he could get from Donald Trump hangs over this summit in Alaska next week like a cloud.
Now, Thomas, let me widen the discussion. Of course, as I've said, that traditionally the idea was that the United States would stand with Ukraine in its tough time. And I believe many of U.S.'s allies would be closely watching this summit between President Putin and President Trump, primarily because many would be trying to figure out whether or not the U.S. is going to give Russia what it always wanted. And if it does happen, don't you think that's going to create a big trust deficit among the allies of the United States? Because they must be like, okay, the United States only cares about its own interests, and whatever we do or whatever promises we were made or whatever agreements we have with the United States, they can be abolished like this.
Well, and this is one of the concerns that President Trump ought to be caring a great deal about. The problem is that he sees European-American relations entirely in transactional terms. And without the benefit of the shared sacrifices that NATO countries, including Turkey, have made to ensure strength against what was originally Soviet threats, now Russian threats to the security of Europe and Central Asia. And part of the problem is that if Trump may not get the peace deal he thinks he wants to get, and people will judge him and judge his strength, whether he is able to negotiate a fair deal versus one that's unfair. If he negotiates an unfair deal, Ukraine will simply not take it. And that will put Europe and Ukraine on a very different course where they have to fend for themselves. But many have concluded that they're probably going to have to do that unless Donald Trump really does start to understand the depth of what Putin has been planning.
Fascinating insights. Thomas Warrick, thanks very much for joining me here on TRT World. I really appreciate your taking out the time.